Hello and welcome to this Revolution.Aero town hall, kindly sponsored by Pillsbury Law. Today's topic is renewable energy, a critical piece in the greater sustainable future. And to talk to us about this, we have two experts, Veronica Relea, who is partner at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, and we have Brian Flynn, MD at Diamond Stream Partners. We're just going to bring them up now.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Veronica. Thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Of course, I feel really strange with these on. I feel like I'm inside an airplane myself, actually.
Well, that's surely a good feeling to have. I think a lot of people haven't really been on one. And Brian, morning to you. How are you doing?
Doing great. Won a tennis match last night. I'm co-captain of the team, and the whole team won, so I'm feeling good.
Congrats.
Fabulous. Thanks to both of you for joining us. I think let's just kick off by talking about Veronica, with you first. What is Pillsbury doing in the renewable energy space?
What are we not doing in the renewable energy space? Quite frankly, we're doing a lot in solar and wind transactions. Energy storage is a huge area of focus and one that our clients are pursuing. We're seeing an uptick in hydrogen initiatives. For the most part, those have been strategic partnerships where our clients have come together. You bring together money and brains and the will to make something happen, and things happen. So those are just some of the things that we're seeing. We're seeing some offshore wind, obviously, which I think will remain important. Curious to hear.
Brian, how about yourself?
Yeah, we're really focused on cost-effective speed. And so it's really less a focus on the fact that we're dealing with renewables and more to do with figuring out a way to get people from A to B faster and with less cost. And it just so happens, coincidentally, that some of the technologies that are evolving right now happen to involve renewable resources. And so there's a positive externality that results from that effort. But it's not specifically focused on just trying to make the world a greener planet. It's really focused on trying to enable people to see relatives at a cheaper cost, to do business trips faster and get home for dinner and see their kids play and that sort of thing.
May I ask a question? Is that acceptable?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely. Go ahead.
Brian, I had a feeling you would say something along those lines because it makes sense. And I appreciate, I mean, we all appreciate transportation being more cost efficient. And in a globalized economy, globalized world, it absolutely makes sense. How does one deal with the increased demand that is surely coming from cost efficiency measures? I know that efforts are put in place. Everyone has these beautiful net zero emission goals by 2050. It all
Right.
sounds great. How do we implement it when demand, same goes for energy demand has been increasing and renewables are not enough to provide all the adequate supply. So would be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so if you think about it right now, to go from Boston to Seattle, where I happen to live, by car, you're going to burn a lot more carbon than you are if you're flying. And so I think that the public needs a little bit of education in terms of which is really a little bit more sustainable in terms of transportation. And so, that's one fact. The second is that as you implement some of these technologies that I mentioned, hybrid electric in particular, for the next 10 years at least, with regard to flying people around. And for short missions, maybe you can get some that's pure electric. For example, float planes up in the Pacific Northwest, where I live, that could work. But you'll wind up having some benefits accrue from that. And so I know that we co-founded a commercial airline down in Mexico that happens to be the largest airline in Mexico now. And there's a huge focus there. There has been for a dozen years at least on figuring out a way to burn less carbon. And so, there are many efforts related to the aircraft themselves, the way in which you fly the aircraft, the intensity of the use of the aircraft when you're flying, because if you're flying around a vessel that can hold 230 people and you're flying around 130 people, you're obviously spending almost the same amount of energy as you would be if you're flying around all those people. And so I know that at Volaris, they pay a lot of attention to the amount of carbon that they're burning per passenger mile.
Brian, how often are you seeing pitches from aviation startups using renewables as a way to sort of propel that technology?
Well, in terms of pitches involving something to do with electric, whether it's pure electric or hybrid electric, that's probably about 90% of the pitches that we see. About 10% of the pitches involve hydrogen. And with hydrogen, I'm more in Michael Liebrick's camp from Bloomberg Energy Ventures, or I think it's, I apologize if I got it incorrect, but it's definitely Michael Liebrick, who is a skeptic in that area. So we're skeptical with regard to the effective use of hydrogen for large aircraft for the next 10 years. In 15 years, I think it's very possible that they'll be able to work all the many kinks out to make it efficient. And I think Michael would agree with that as well.
You're not alone in that, Brian. I personally, I am very excited about hydrogen and its potential. Mm-hmm. I'm not of the view that we're going to have something scalable that will work for the aviation industry, for instance, in short order. Yep. However, these things that are happening now, these partnerships that are occurring, we're seeing joint development agreements among various mm-hmm. corporations, clients in Canada, clients in Asia, who are putting money into these things. Mm-hmm. It's necessary. However, without the corresponding changes in regulation, tax right. credits, et cetera, it simply won't really work on any timeline that I'm concerned with as an initial matter, because I'm a living person now, but any timeline that, our children are going to be able to see, I don't know if we're going to be able to accomplish that without having the government support and the regulations to back it up.
I think that's probably a fair statement. I'd only take a slight exception to it in that if you're talking about the mid 2030s, when some of the technologies have evolved much further than where they are today, I think it is possible that the geniuses out there who are working on these massive problems right now will have sorted enough of it out that it won't require a massive subsidy from the government for it to actually be effective. So in the near term, it would require a massive subsidy from the government for it to be effective, which is the same with SAF. In that, right. the cost of SAF is so high right now that there's a lot of virtue signaling by airlines using it, et cetera. But if you think about how an airline operates and what it's really trying to do, it's trying to bring its costs down so that it can eke out a profit. And as you know, operating commercial airlines has not traditionally been something that's super high margin. And so to take one of the biggest variable costs, the second largest variable cost, and to triple the price of it and expect that you're going to see ticket prices come down, it's just that's fool's thinking.
Yeah.
So relating to that, where do you see the most investment in the sustainability or renewable space right now? And are the right people involved? I think you guys, we're talking a lot about, many factors, but are the right people involved at this stage?
Well, we're, sorry, was that for me?
Okay. I think it's fair for you to take it first from an aviation specific perspective. Yeah. I have other views and I can add them at the end.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I think that it's in that, in the aviation space, we've seen a lot of money get plowed into something that I've been publicly stating this for years now, that for eVTOLs to hit the targets that we've seen put out there, for example, 100,000 flights per day in LA by 2030, we don't think that's realistic. We think that it's not because the vehicles won't fly, and it's in part because of the economics, when you look at the assumptions that some of the operators are using with regard to how many of the seats are going to be filled on all the flights and how many flights you can operate, et cetera, those are really, really tough. I mean, it's very difficult to get 75% load factors in commercial aviation. Volaris typically averages about 85% or so, but they're dealing with many, many more seats than you are when you've got 4 seats you're trying to sell, or 5 or 6 seats you're trying to sell. And so it's a much more difficult problem to solve there. But primarily the reason that we think it's going to be a challenge relates to things that are unrelated to the vehicles flying. It really relates to the airspace management and the need for the infrastructure to be put in place that's nowhere close to being put in place right now. And we think that the FAA in particular will be very cautious about permitting dense operation of these aircraft at scale when they're operated by humans, in any short time frame. I think that the FAA will take the experience from companies like Elroy Air, which will be flying around cargo drones, and it will accumulate that body of experience and utilize that to help facilitate what we think is going to be necessary, which is autonomous flying. We just don't think that you can have 100,000 flights per day in LA in a short period of time that are operated without a number of crashes. And so so those technologies, I think, they're being developed right now. So it's not that it won't happen; it will happen. It's just a difference or disagreement over timing.
Just to add, from the perspective of the lawyer who does renewable energy work, it is pretty clear that there is more investment in renewable energy sources such as solar and wind, and we're seeing that even coming from the oil majors, for example, who have pledged to various different goals. Is it enough? That's perhaps the question that, I'd love to say sure, but we can always do more. We just had a huge infrastructure bill, 1.2 trillion, passed by the Senate, a bipartisan bill that does have a lot of money going into infrastructure in the US, EVs, electric vehicles, airports directly are getting the benefit of at least, I believe, 25 billion.
Yes.
And these are good signs. The government, as I said earlier, must be involved if we are to get to a place where we're going to be able to replace fossil fuels at any point in the future. And I agree with you, Brian, that infrastructure seems to be lagging. It would, thankfully, we're making advances in that arena through this huge government spending bill, the Build Back Better Act. We'll see what happens with that. That comes with its own set of fuel credit incentives and other good things that I think are actually necessary in order to achieve all these goals. So are we doing enough? Probably not. Are we doing good things? Sure. More can be done, and infrastructure is lagging for sure. If we're thinking electrification in aviation, putting aside the issues of size and scale and all sorts of things, we don't have the infrastructure for that currently, right? And so this would be a massive undertaking. And so things are progressing. We feel pretty good about what the government is doing, and our clients are feeling quite positive about, for instance, the hydrogen PTC that we think is likely. these are things where we're seeing clients, new players for the most part. These are smaller players that are just coming into this, wanting to participate. And the lawyers over here are, of course, we welcome the work, and we are willing to help out in navigating the regulations around it, the tax credits, and just actually executing the transaction.
Yeah, let me pick up on the infrastructure part if I can on the airport side. The $25 billion is a drop in the bucket relative to the amount of deferred maintenance that exists at the airports today. For anyone who's flown around the U.S. a fair amount, I certainly have, and compare our airports to some of the other airports around the world, it's almost like we're a third world country. Some of the airports are getting better, thankfully, but the $25 billion is a down payment on about $125 billion of deferred maintenance for just the existing infrastructure. And if you think about what's going to happen over the next 10 years, the revolution isn't in long distance travel. The revolution is going to be in regional travel. That is flights of, about 2 hours of, 5 to 750 miles, 300-mile flights, et cetera, flying into the airports that aren't being well utilized right now. And there's really not much of the infrastructure money in that bill that's targeted to those airports.
That's right.
And they have a massive need to, thankfully the land is already allocated, but they have a massive need to further electrify those airports. And even the big airports, when we talked to SeaTac Airport, and we went through the math and looked at their excess spare capacity of electrons coming into the airport, if you had 3 eVTOLs that were being charged with 1 megawatt batteries at 3C, you would literally shut the airport down. And when we talk to the smaller airports of Renton, Moses Lake, et cetera, they don't have any plans, let alone excess capacity, current excess capacity to power these eVTOL aircraft, which is one of the many reasons that we're bullish on hybrid electric. Primarily, we're bullish on hybrid electric because we think that you won't have the energy density of the batteries to be great enough to really carry very many people for a very long distance all on its own for a while, at least.
Well, Brian, I think relating to that, we have a question from Claire Healy at AIC Title Service. How do they plan to speed up the battery charging? You talked about range and short distance being the first.
Yeah, so we take what we look at is we look at what the existing technologies are and what the cost is and what the implications are for some of the technologies that are under development and how far away they are. And what we've seen is that in terms of the rate at which you can recharge a battery, that has been improving dramatically. And we all know this from the auto industry, right? Where it's where the fast charging is a lot more efficient than it was 10 years ago. And so that's an area in which I'm not expert to really say anything significant or impactful for anybody. And so I apologize for that, but it is going in the right direction in terms of the speed at which you can recharge the batteries. But again, picking up on a point I made just a moment ago, that if you have a hybrid electric aircraft, you'll be able to recharge the batteries as you're flying the aircraft around, so that when you land, you may wind up landing not really needing to do a lot of recharging at that location, because you'll have carbon that you'll be able to load back onto the aircraft, because every airport has a facility to put more carbon on the aircraft.
Veronica, you talked a little bit about offshore energy and how that's sort of still a very big thing. We talked to the helicopter operators, and they believe that oil and gas at least has a life of about 10 to 12 years. Although there is a shift. What are you seeing in that sort of space?
Yeah, there is certainly a shift, and it's been happening for quite some time at this point. It has been slower than many would like, but at the end of the day, as I said earlier, we have a demand for energy that has been increasing,
Mm-hmm.
and the renewable sources that are currently operating are not enough to provide that. And so, of course, you can't just get rid of fossil fuels. You need to phase them out in a manner that is consistent with new investment coming in for renewable energy sources. And that is the trend that we're seeing, yes, even from the oil majors, although I won't say too much about that, because again, it'll come back to, are they doing enough? And I don't really want to comment on that. But the trend has been going in the right direction. The speed of it is what it has been increasing. In recent years, the speed is getting faster, yes, but are we close enough? Balls in the air.
Let me pick up on that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I thought I heard you interrupt. Please go ahead.
I hate interrupting people. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to. So
okay.
We look at it slightly differently, which is that, we look at it not in terms of, are you doing enough or not? We look at it as companies are going to evolve and grow and progress because, they're really adding more value to humans and, to consumers or customers of some sort, whether it's B2B or B2C. And so it's really going to be driven by the economics. And we're extremely optimistic that the technologies that are evolving right now, initially with small drones and with hybrid electric cargo drones and with small aircraft retrofits that MagniX is working on, et cetera, that's going to evolve on its own, whether the government wants it to evolve or not. And it's evolving because the costs are going to come down. We think that the costs will be able to come down for regional aviation by somewhere between 40 and 80%. And as that occurs, you'll wind up seeing modal substitution. So you'll see people getting out of cars and getting onto these aircraft and flying, which is a great thing for the environment. And I'm not sure how much additional help the government will need to provide, except for some of the infrastructure issues, and obviously except for needing the regulations to be put in place to facilitate that happening. But the technologies themselves are already on their way to really enable that to happen without people feeling like, I've got to lose 5 pounds. I've got to do more in some way to better the world. It's going to happen because the economics are going to drive it.
I completely agree, and that is a key driver in why solar and wind have picked up and are seeing more and more investments, because the technologies have become much cheaper, competitive with fossil fuels. And that is what we expect as a general matter to happen with things like hydrogen, biofuels. We do expect technology improvements. We do expect costs to come down. There is a role for government, however, obviously. Solar and wind didn't just get there on their own. There has been government help and tax credits that have, in combination with industry participants, gotten us to where we are at this point.
Yeah, it accelerated it. It. But I'm we're very excited when you can fly 1 seat, 1 mile in the order of magnitude of 40 cents to 50 cents or so. You'll begin to see massive substitution out of automobiles and onto cars. And so our prediction that we made 3 years ago is that in 10 years, there will be more people flying regionally than there will be flying long distance. And that'll require about a 10% shift out of cars for people who were otherwise would have driven 300 to 500 miles. Because right now, the percentage of people who are flying is in the order of 2 to 3% in that 300 to 500 mile range. It's amazing what people do today and what the impact will be going forward. And it's going to be really positive for us all.
Going back to batteries, we have some interesting questions coming in from the audience. So Graham Stevenson wants to know, while airports are aware of the possible requirement for recharging, are the national grids able to supply the power and the cables able to take the load? Don't know if this is one for either of you. Yeah,
that's another great question that we've looked at. We don't really look at like national grids and all that, because it's not, we can't, we're not really set up to invest in that. So we're not going to, so I've only read the same things that you all probably read on this. So we look at it at more of a micro level of, at that airport, what are their needs right now? What are their needs right now? Or what's the excess supply that they have right now? And under the assumptions that we're seeing from the various aircraft, manufacturers out there, what are their needs going to be? And they have no idea how to solve that. And we're not really sure. We've thought about it hard. And there's a chicken and egg issue, because if you're going to put in, let's say, some big manufacturing plant, you can go to the utility and say, hey, I need this amount of electricity in this time frame. And they'll say, okay, we'll build it, because we know what the demand is going to be as soon as you finish the factory and we've got the electrons coming in there, they'll start to get repaid. Here, we're not really sure what the penetration curve is going to look like and what the timing of it's going to look like. And so it's very uncertain for those who are looking to electrify the airports as to how to not go bankrupt in the process, not have a global crossing occur for those companies where they spend all the money putting in the fiber optic cable and all that, and then wind up going bankrupt. And it's the subsequent owners who actually wind up reaping the benefits of that infrastructure that was put in.
Veronica, anything to add?
I mean, there have been, there has been money going into the effort to electrify airports. And I'm not going to go back to is it enough, et cetera. The truth of the matter is that there are FAA grants to electrify airports. There are good things out there that support investment in this area. It's already underway at several major airports, perhaps more. That's not over here. Perhaps more in Europe, where, and I think we'll talk about that at some point. I think they are a bit of ahead of a curve, of the curve as compared to the U.S. We're moving in the right direction. Yes. I have some reservations about how that can be accomplished. I have more reservations as it relates to the U.S., but it is extremely pleasing to see. We have international clients who are pursuing these things and who are investing in clean energy technology. And at the end of the day, I have to believe that good things will come out of that, and that we'll see improvements, hopefully in my lifetime.
But how are they justifying making the investment today when the demand curve is so uncertain in the future in terms of airport electrification?
Yeah, there are a lot of there are contracts out there with the government that involve electrification, that kind of provide a sort of a sure thing. Government support backing something, obviously. And I'm not talking public-private partnership, but in a similar vein, these are projects that are funded by the government, and so there's sort of a presumption that these will be seen through, and that the project will get done. I agree with you that economics are not necessarily there, and a lot of folks are not feeling very confident about these things. I can't speak to public, some of the deals that we've seen are in the public transportation, buses, school buses, et cetera, less so in airports. But the issue has been with infrastructure not existing. And so these have been joint efforts among that include the folks who are the experts in EV technology, the folks who are providing the charging stations and investing the money, and the government who has these contracts, who are purchasing the service. And so they're all they're all related, and they're all, is it a model that can be replicated elsewhere? Perhaps, but these are existing PPAs, if you will. There are contracts out there to purchase the service, and so it's kind of it's a good deal for everyone.
Yeah, because the government's subsidizing it, right? I mean, it's not an economic proposition.
But the goal is to achieve those improvements in technology, to achieve the energy efficient, the cost efficiency, et cetera, that we know will come from technological advances. And so, there's a little bit of this, it'll pay for itself kind of, we'll reach a point where it will be economic. It will make economic sense without necessarily having to prop it up. That's where we are getting to with solar and wind. And so, I'm optimistic, and I have to say, I'm excited to see, as I said earlier, new players in the field, people who are just, investing in startups that are pursuing these clean tech, these, innovative ideas. And it's exciting. It's exciting. I love it when the smart people are in the room coming up with ideas and there's money behind them. It's fantastic to be able to put these. One of the things I do as a lawyer is really put these people together. I know you, I know you. Let's now have you guys meet one another and see if a deal can be struck. And as a byproduct, you'll do something good, while also potentially making a huge profit eventually with these technologies. So call me an optimist. I tend to be very cynical for the most part. We can talk about greenwashing for hours, and that just it hurts my heart. But with this, I'm optimistic. Just having seen what improvements have been made in solar and wind. It's just the general trend, and technology advances are making things cheaper and more competitive from a cost perspective. And I'm pretty confident that that's, I don't know how fast, but that's the trend, and that's, I think, where we're headed.
So Washington State's a leader in aviation. As you know, it's the home to Boeing and hundreds of other aviation-related companies. magniX is one of the companies that's around here. And so magniX and Boeing and SeaTac Airport and we and some of the utility companies created a group called the Washington State Electric Aviation Working Group. And now we've since rebranded it a bit. So that we can try to think through these massive problems that have to be solved, and to try to solve them in a way that's economic, so that there's not just pure capital destruction. And one of the learnings that came from that is that a learning that we were able to transfer from our commercial aviation experience, which is that you need to set up a network, and the network has to be comprised of a number of airports, of communities that want to or already have commonalities in terms of people who either came from there or going to there, or businesses, et cetera. And so we set up a network of about 6 airports, and to try to figure out, how do you solve all these problems for just those 6 airports? Because it's not that those airports won't have people flying around elsewhere. And so we thought, look, this is a massive problem. You're going to need to hire some consultants to really spend some more hours, and to try to coordinate the efforts of the various members of the group who can contribute whatever they can to help solve those problems. So, I'm optimistic, as you are, that the problems are solvable, and that they will be solved, and that it will take some government assistance, I think, to solve them. But they're hard problems, and that they
Indeed.
will be, it will take a few more years, which is fine, because the various aircraft that are being worked on right now, they won't be certified for another couple of years anyhow. And so again, our viewpoint is that you'll wind up having the FAA certify hybrid electric cargo drones, big cargo drones to fly over unpopulated and underpopulated areas initially. And then as they prove out the safety of those operations and just the logistics of those operations on its scale, then you'll wind up having those drones be, see them more and more frequently. And at that point, I think that you'll be close to the time where the FAA will be ready to certify and fully certify for more than just police, fire, rescue, intel, et cetera. So those companies will be able to get started with some of the applications that are out there, but they won't be able to massively scale in the ways in which we all want them to for at least 5 years, but more likely, closer to 10 than 5. We could be wrong. And there's a lot of money that's betting that we're wrong. So, and I want them to be right, by the way. I want to be wrong.
But you know what? It's honestly, it's not about being right or wrong. It's about being able to just change our mind, adapt. We need to be able to evolve and change our minds about things and not put all our eggs in one basket and not, pursue only the one idea that me personally, Veronica, have in my head. That's not the way really to achieve things. And what you're saying, this coalition of sorts, the several airports that you were talking about in Washington, it's fantastic. This is the way to really accomplish more. It's to get the relevant people together, to work together to try to solve the problems. I mean, now I'm getting into how diversity improves, diversity of ideas improves results, but it is true. And I do think that's going to be a huge part, and it has been a huge part in the developments that we're seeing, these strategic partnerships, it's different folks coming together and thinking about these problems together. Yes, government has a role to play.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Yeah, sorry. I'm really glad you brought that up because we actually have a question around sort of the geopolitics, aspect of sourcing materials to make batteries. This is from Mike Francis, who's saying the materials seem to be in countries which aren't so friendly. As you mentioned, you put a lot of people together in rooms. I mean, how many of those are you seeing, and how do you see sort of a way forward?
Yeah. Listen, the problem that we've seen recently with the pandemic and tariffs and all these products coming from China that are necessary for solar panels, it has been a problem, and it delayed a number of deals over the course of the last couple of years. A number of deals got delayed. What are we doing? Well, for one thing, there's a push for having some of those materials produced really in the U.S. And that is one thing that's being pursued that I think makes sense, quite frankly. There are technological advances that are being done here in the U.S. that I think will affect the renewable energy industry more globally. There are investments in clean technology that are happening, but we haven't solved the problems. No, I mean the number of projects that got delayed on account of these tariffs and EPC contractors, essentially solar panel suppliers pulling out of deals, etc. It had a huge impact, but again, like I said, I don't know, improvements in technology and bringing some of that production to the U.S. Those are things that people are thinking about when they think about how do we not rely so much on other countries. How do we prevent another COVID-19 situation to happen? How do we prevent another shortage of all these supplies that are necessary Those are sort of the larger questions, and they must involve some kind of movement towards domestic production and advancing technology so that makes sense, so
Well,
that that's cost efficient.
I interpreted the question slightly differently. I thought that the question was focused a little bit more on the mining of some of the materials that are going into the batteries right now, and the fact that some of those countries are not exactly either friendly to the U.S. or their labor practices are certainly not consistent with our values and ethics in the in the Western world. And so, yeah, I mean, cobalt is not everywhere, and so you can't just think that you're going to find cobalt in some friendlier country or something like that. But the good news is that there are more than a couple dozen companies that are out there right now working on various battery chemistries that don't involve some of those elements. And Breakthrough Energy Ventures has invested in several of them. That's Bill Gates's company or his initiative. And there are many others that are out there, and we're super optimistic. I'd say that the one area where I've been most disappointed over the past 5 years is just that there hasn't been a breakthrough that's actually gotten to scale. Because with batteries, there's so many elements that you need to optimize for. It's not just the energy density of the battery. You've got to be able to get the energy out of the battery. You've got to be able to recharge the battery. You got to make sure that it doesn't it doesn't blow up on you and catch fire, which is a terrible thing to happen on the ground, let alone in the air. It's got to have a cost associated with it. And one of the elements that's really been a struggle for many of the chemistries right now is developing something that has the cycles that the batteries can take before they need to be swapped out. And so, and then the manufacturability of some of these batteries, where they've been able to prove it with a super small scale in a lab, but they haven't been able to to advance the technology in a way that really is looks like it's on the horizon right now. So I'm hoping for more advancement in the not too distant future, but I know that billions are going after it right now. And so we're not playing that game because, first of all, we're not chemists, so we don't know anything about what actually have a point of view with regard to what the ideal chemistry of a battery should be that would optimize for all those dimensions that I just mentioned. But also that it requires a scale of investment that's beyond the scale of investing that our fund has. And also, our fund is really focused on investing in companies that have existing products to serve existing markets, that have positive exposure to the various advancements that are going on in related and adjacent areas. And so that seems to us, at least, to be a wise place to play, where you're going to have fewer flameouts. But by the same token, we won't have, none of the companies that we're investing in, at least, well, we'll see, will likely be on the cover of Time because they wound up having some amazing breakthrough that no one had thought of before, that hadn't been tried before, because that's really not in the purview of what we do.
Brian, there's a question about hybrid electric aircraft from Gecheng Sa. Don't know if I've said that right. The hybrid aircraft may be difficult to be efficient and green if you need to bring in an electricity generation system due to weight and recharging the batteries by fuel engine. Comment? ?
Well, I think that there are a number of people out there who are, backing companies that are not too far away from going into production that would, respectfully disagree that it is possible to have a hybrid electric aircraft that can operate with the kind of economics that you need that aircraft to operate at, that will wind up making it a useful tool for business as well as for commercial, flying humans around. It's going to, those technologies have been evolving just as they evolved with autos, because you'll all remember that the first autos you probably became aware of that were electric were actually hybrid electric, the Priuses, before it ever got to a pure electric variation of that technology. And so likewise, we think in for all the reasons that, some of the reasons that I've discussed and some of the reasons that I haven't discussed, that the technology is far more likely to advance, initially starting with hybrid electric. And as the battery densities improve, the range will improve, the payload will improve. You'll be able to operate the vehicle with more electricity and less carbon over time. And so that evolution will occur. I'm not, we don't have curves on that with regard to exactly how fast that's going to occur. We just know that if you can introduce it with a cost of 60 cents a seat mile today, evolving down to 20 cents a seat mile over the next 10 years, you'll have a massive business there.
Veronica, question for you now that you've said the G word sometime back, greenwashing. How can we caution against that? I mean, we get press releases every week with the word sustainable in it. So what's your take?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about that, and let me just measure my words a little bit, because of course I have clients that are in all sorts of engaged in all sorts of who deal with more than just renewable energy, and are doing great things in terms of investing in clean tech, for instance, to make improvements and shift away from fossil fuels. But where greenwashing has become sort of I'm not too happy with how it's being used oftentimes to sort of diminish all efforts that are being done. It is a thing that happens where companies will take certain measures to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce their carbon footprint, and yet they still operate in the oil and gas industry. These are, but like I said before, we can't simply get rid of fossil fuels just like that. And we have to sort of keep the perspective of we're shifting away from fossil fuels. That's a general trend that is happening. And there will be still fossil fuel usage in the world for quite some time. And to ding a company simply because they have a mix of because what they do on one end unfortunately has it offsets greenhouse emissions that they're creating on the other side, and we end up with this net zero. This is what we call the net zero emissions, right? A lot of the times it's being done through offsets, which at the end of the day, it's the greenwashing that we're talking about, meaning you're not quite accomplishing it in a way that's 100% beneficial to the world. I have like I said, have a bit of an issue with how it's used as just a way to vilify some companies and players in the industry. It's necessary in many ways in connection with the transition. It's consistent with the energy transition. And I think we'll get to a point where the positives will outweigh the negatives. But it's a process, we'll get there. We'll get there when, we've been talking about how fast. It's not going to be the next 5 years. It's going to take some time. But we're moving in the right direction. And, so long as companies do make these pledges and we hold them accountable, I think that's going to be key here. Let's hold them accountable and, make sure that we test them every few years. Have you reached the goal that you promised a few years ago? That's how we can keep them honest.
Well, three things. The first is that those doing the vilifying, I think you're idiotic, moronic, and hypocritical. I think it's ridiculous. I think that, the second thing is that people, like Bill Gates, who in his book on energy this year talks about how he buys carbon offsets. That's to be applauded. It's not just simply, greenwashing. He's taking efforts to, steps. Now, is it enough? No, but it's a step. I mean, for gosh sakes, encourage that. And the third thing is that publicly traded companies like Valaris down in Mexico, they're already being measured on this. I mean, they measure this all the time in terms of how much carbon they're trying to save, and they're trying to save it for two reasons. One is for the green reason, and the second is the more carbon they save, the more fuel they save, the more money they save, the lower their costs are, and therefore the lower the ticket prices can be, so that people can go see their relatives and go see their friends or family or on business trips, etc., and help society grow, because GDP grows at about 1.5% or 1.5 times the rate of aviation growth. And so it's a positive for society to see that happen. And so for people to say, well, I'm not going to fly anywhere, et cetera, is just, I think it's ridiculous, personally.
So Brian, when do you see the shift to completely renewable energy? I know you have a sort of, we've talked about a number in the past.
Oh, when do I see it to?
Sorry. The time.
We're asking you to predict the future.
Years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. It's a long time, from now. And so I don't think that should be the goal. I mean, I think that the goal should be to make continuous improvement and to really make the improvements as rapidly as you can, and really focus on the areas that have the biggest impact. And in that process, you'll get to where you're gonna get to. Yeah, it's great to have a goal of completely, carbon neutral and all that. And so maybe I'm being overly dismissive of it, but I think that, we think a little bit more practically in terms of, okay, over the next 2 or 3 years, what can you do? What would the impact be? Let's measure that impact, and then let's figure things out from there. Because the fact is that all these technologies are evolving in ways that are a little bit predictable, but in some ways a little bit unpredictable. And so you'll need to rely on that some of that evolution will occur, so that you'll be able to take additional steps that really wouldn't make economic sense right now. It's like perhaps for your client who's investing in the electrification of an airport to put a whole bunch of electrons in years before they're going to need to use those electrons. Okay, great. The government, put some infrastructure in place. It's going to be used someday, but just set realistic targets, do the best you can to achieve the targets, and look and see where you're going to, and look to see whether you need to take additional steps. Gates and other people have views with regard to other steps outside of aviation that will have a much larger impact on our greenhouse gas emissions and pollution in general. And so it's, obviously we're in this industry, so we're focused on the industry, but it's not as though this is the only area where you're going to be able to get massive improvements over time.
We have many comments in the comment section just about how the electricity could be sold to the city while they wait for the airport to require the demand. If we don't build towards it now, we'll have a lot of great electrical aircraft and no way to fuel them.
That's a problem.
Another one coming in from
chicken and egg.
Yeah. Another one coming in from.
That's why hybrid electric is important, because if you've got hybrid electric, you may not have to have the entire airport electrified to the extent that you'll need it to be electrified. Another adjacent point is that in talking to the utilities, that a lot of times the time it takes from the initial idea of putting in power lines or other aspects of the infrastructure of substations is years, many years. And so you better be thinking about that before you're actually spending a lot of money. You better be thinking about that, and you should be thinking about it now, because it doesn't really cost that much money to do the planning for it. And so that's where I think Washington State is really trying to focus its effort in terms of figuring out like how much is needed, when do we have to put it in. And then in the meantime, if you've got hybrid electric aircraft, you won't need to have as many electrons coming into the airport as today as you will over time.
Absolutely. I guess final question to the both of you. Veronica, what solution or technology are you most excited about in the renewable energy space?
Oh gosh. I get excited about lots of things, but cautiously excited. As a general matter, what excites me the most about what what's what I see happening is not so much any particular technology or any, you know, anything specific like that, but it's more the folks who are coming together to make this happen. It's been really nice to see the brains that are coming together, the dollars that are following those brains, and these strategic partnerships that are happening. Um, that excites me the most, both from the perspective of, you know, the right people are talking about these things and we will see results and hopefully accelerated results because it's the right people talking about these things. But also as a lawyer, you know, I want to make deals happen. And this is how deals get done. It's when the right people get together. And so, you know, yeah, I'm excited about hydrogen because of its potential. It's years away. I am cautiously optimistic about it. I have to be realistic about where we are on that. And offshore wind, I find extremely exciting. There are also these solar, you know, wind offshore projects that are, you know, hybrid wind, solar offshore projects that I find fascinating. I think there's a lot more to do there. There's a lot of wind and a lot of solar out in the sea that, you know, we should think about harnessing that power and using it. Um, those things I find exciting. But like I said, the thing that I find the most exciting really is seeing all these folks come together and making things happen. Sometimes competitors, sometimes unlikely partnerships. We're seeing all sorts of things, and it's exciting to see. It's exciting to see. You know, these JVs, these joint development arrangements that are being put together by the right folks. And I feel optimistic about those.
I think, picking up on part of your comment, that I think there's never been a time in aviation that's as exciting as today with regard to the number of people who are dedicating their lives to coming up with innovative approaches to solving known problems that will wind up having a transformative impact on society. And second, that the capital necessary to enable those ideas to come to life is beginning to be attracted to the industry, which I think is tremendous.
Agreed.
The third aspect that I'm excited about is that the FAA and NASA, I think, are really taking a much more innovative and cooperative approach to helping these companies achieve their ambitions and to really set the stage. Now, they need to do a lot more, especially the FAA, which I think is underfunded, grossly underfunded, needs to do even more. But I applaud their efforts that they've had so far. They just need to pick up the pace, and I think to pick up the pace, they're going to need more capital to do that. In terms of the actual technologies, I mean, every day I see plans that are so, I'm just blown away with the creativity of some of the ideas behind behind these products that they're selling, or services or software applications that they've created. And so it's really impossible for me to just pick out one among the many that I get to see. And it's a great time to be in the industry, right now. And it's a great time to be investing in the industry right now. It's akin to the early days of the internet. It's akin to the early days of wireless. And I had previously been a part of the wireless industry and helped that grow in the early 90s through the late 90s. And it's gonna change our lives in ways that we have predictions on, and we'll see how soon those predictions come to fruition.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful. Thank you both so much for your inputs. It's been a great discussion. I feel like we could keep going, but thanks so much for joining today. We really appreciate it. And if we don't see you before, have a great holiday season. Thanks to
Thank you.
Veronica.
Same to you.
To you as
Thank
well.
you.
Merry Christmas.
Bye.
And send us all your great business ideas.
Thanks
Please
so much.
do. Bye.
Thank you.
That was Veronica Vrelea from Pillsbury and Brian Flynn from Diamond Stream. Thanks so much to everyone who tuned in today. Great subject. Have